Welcome to Light Over Heat with Professor David Yamani. Today I'm going to talk about the NAXALT Fallacy, that's not all X are like that, by reading a Substack post I recently published on this topic. Today I learned NAXALT Fallacy, not all X are like that. This is the other side of my problem with averages argument about gun owners. So I was scrolling through X recently and came across a reference to something I had never heard of before, the NAXALT Fallacy. The acronym refers to not all X are like that, where X is some phenomenon of interest. And the fallacy here is the mistaken belief that because someone or something in a group of people or things lies at the extreme, the average does not exist. I don't know the origin of this fallacy, but I found it referenced in Gene Twenge's 2023 book, Generations, The Real Difference Between Gen Z, Millennials, Gen X, Boomers, and Silents, and What They Mean for America's Future. Twenge gives a couple of good examples of the NAXALT fallacy in chapter 1 of that book. And here I'll quote, "Just because there is an average difference doesn't mean that everyone in the generation is exactly the same. When someone says, but I'm a Gen Zer and I don't spend much time online, so I don't think there's really a generational difference, they are committing what some call the NAXALT fallacy, for not all X are like that. The NAXALT fallacy is the mistaken belief that because someone in the group lies at the extreme, the average does not exist. It's like someone saying seatbelts save lives and her friend arguing back, you're overgeneralizing. I know somebody who got strangled by their seatbelt. Maybe so, but seatbelts have saved many more lives than they have taken. The rare counterexample does nothing to disprove the average result, which is much lower risk of death when wearing a seatbelt than when not. Groups differ within themselves as well as between each other, but the group differences still exist." The NAXALT fallacy caught my attention because in looking at gun owners and gun culture, I frequently find myself trying to look beneath the surface of the kinds of statistical averages that invite NAXALT critiques. For example, years ago, I wrote about the problem with averages in understanding guns, violence, and crime. Looking at an average, like the firearm homicide rate in the United States, can be misleading, I argued, because it glosses over important differences between subpopulations within the United States. As I like to say, no one lives in, quote unquote, the United States. We all live in local communities within the United States and in social networks within those local communities. Our risk of firearm homicide or injury varies dramatically depending on the nature of those communities and the composition of our social networks, as Andrew Papachristos convincingly demonstrates in his research. This doesn't mean that the firearm homicide rate in the United States as an average is not real. It just means it is limited. Another example is my work on understanding gun owner diversity. I have frequently noted that the statistically average gun owner is a politically conservative, middle-aged married man from the rural South or Mountain West. That is, the characters from TV's Duck Dynasty. This statistical average is true as far as it goes. I just don't think it goes very far. There is a lot of diversity among gun owners, and the face of gun ownership is changing, as recent stories about diverse gun owners in Wired, the New York Times, and NPR's All Things Considered highlight. To better understand guns in America today, we need to ground our arguments in this diverse reality of contemporary gun ownership rather than perpetuating divisive mythologies. Are politically conservative white men from rural areas overrepresented among gun owners relative to their portion of the population? Bullseye. Are they a majority of gun owners? Not by a long shot. I delved into this earlier this year using data from the Pew Research Center's American Trends panel from 2023. I combined those who identified as white plus male plus politically conservative plus rural as fitting the Duck Dynasty stereotype and found that 75.6% of these individuals said they owned a gun. This is 2.5 times the rate of gun ownership of everyone else in the sample. Those who fit the Duck Dynasty stereotype definitely like their guns. But what proportion of all gun owners fit that stereotype? Only 12.2%, just over 1 in 10 gun owners. To be clear, I am not denying that the statistical average exists. I am not saying that because I know liberal and young and single and female and trans and urban and Californian gun owners that the statistical average is untrue. I am saying that only focusing on the statistical average draws our attention away from some very interesting and very important phenomena in gun culture. So what do you think? Is my claim an example of the NAXALT fallacy? I'm interested to know your thoughts.